Hey guys, Chris Irvin, the ketologist, coming at you from Tampa, Florida today. Just getting settled in, having my first cup of coffee, and just getting ready to get started with work for the day. I'm actually giving Neuro Roast a try for the first time today. Neuro Roast is this new mushroom coffee that's blended with like 6 different adaptogenic mushrooms, and I'm a huge fan of adaptogens, and I really like lion's mane and cordyceps and chaga, so I'm really pumped to give it a try. I'll definitely let you guys know how it is. But I wanted to come at you with a question that came up on my Instagram this morning because it's a question that I get very frequently, and it's regarding protein consumption. So the question is, if I'm going to be going out to a restaurant, say a Brazilian steakhouse, and I'm going to be eating a lot of protein, eating a lot of meat, do I have to worry about that harming my state of ketosis? And for some of you, you guys know right where this kind of question is going, but for others, you might be a little confused, so I'll try to bring you up to speed. But really, this question is regarding a process that occurs in our body known as gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis is something that occurs naturally in us, and it's basically the process of taking non-glucose substrate and converting it into glucose to meet certain demands of the body. And even when you're in a ketogenic state, your body still demands some level of glucose. There's certain cells in our bodies that can't use can't use ketones and fat for fuel, so it has to use glucose still. Things like red blood cells and even certain portions of our brain. So gluconeogenesis is something that's real, and it's something that has to occur. And typically gluconeogenesis can occur from protein. So basically there's certain proteins, certain amino acids are glucogenic, meaning that they can be more easily converted to glucose through gluconeogenesis. So this is kind of where this concern of having too much protein and being kicked out of ketosis comes from, because a lot of people just assume that, since we are on a low carb diet, we're going to be at an increased risk for gluconeogenesis, and that's going to be harmful for ketosis. So if we have too much protein, it's going to kick us out. And really, the research that we've had so far, and there's not a lot on it, hasn't really shown this. There's been some research out there where they looked at like people fasting in the morning on low carb diets and regular diets, and they found that while gluconeogenesis may be elevated in the morning for people who are on low carb diets, it tends to balance itself out throughout the rest of the day, meaning that there's not a huge difference in these rates of gluconeogenesis. So there hasn't really been anything in the research yet to support this idea that being in ketosis means that you're at an increased risk for gluconeogenesis. So since there's really no great evidence in the research to support this gluconeogenesis being a bigger problem for people that are in ketosis, I think a lot of these concerns are coming from people who are doing a lot of self-experimentation and testing their own blood glucose levels, which I'm a huge proponent of. But it's important to remember that testing your blood glucose levels is really hard to interpret. So I think a lot of times what happens is people, they'll eat a meal that either they have a lot of protein in it or they have leaner sources of protein like chicken or something, and they'll test their ketone levels, and their ketone levels may be down or their blood glucose levels may be elevated. And there's a lot of things that can be going on here. But I think an important thing to point out is that we don't really have a great understanding of what happens to our blood levels postprandial. And postprandial just means following a meal. It's very common for your numbers to be a little bit skewed after you have a meal. I notice that I can have a very keto-friendly meal, and after the meal, my ketone levels might be down and my glucose levels may be up. And there's a lot of things that can be going on here with this. I think that one of the reasons why ketone levels could be down is because, when you're having a meal and you're providing your body with exogenous or from outside the body substrate that it can use for energy, then it might not need to produce as many ketones internally for those first couple hours after you eat. So I don't think that testing your blood glucose right after you have a meal is a great indicator of knowing what's really going on in your body. So I think this is kind of like one of the first areas where people think that having too much protein is going to kick them out of ketosis. But in the case like the original question where like you're going out to a restaurant and you're having like massive amounts of meat, I don't think the question should be if the protein's going to kick you out of ketosis. I really think the question should be, is the calories going to kick you out of ketosis? So I'm a really firm believer that the best ketogenic diet is one in which you're restricting calories. I think that, you should be in a little bit of a caloric deficit on keto because, for one, being in a caloric deficit has been shown time and time again to have numerous health benefits. but also it can help with getting your ketone levels elevated, and it can help with a bunch of other things that are just beneficial for overall health. So I think that in the case of like you're going out and you're eating massive amounts of meat, chances are you're going to be having a lot of calories, and this may lower your ketone productions because your body may not be needing to produce as many ketones because of how much energy you're providing from the meal you're having. But I don't necessarily think that that's a direct result of having too much protein. There are different theories out there with this where some people think that maybe, different levels of your insulin sensitivity may be correlated with, the process of gluconeogenesis. So some people think that, say, if you're more insulin resistant and you have a harder time breaking down fat, maybe you are going to be using protein or even breaking down your muscle protein more for energy production. That's kind of yet to be determined. I do think there could be some truth to this, but kind of the take home that I want to give here, guys, is that, the person that came to me with this question, they were kind of talking about how the biggest cheat that they have on a ketogenic diet is that they have a day where they may have too much protein. And if that's the worst thing that you're doing on keto is that you're having too much protein, like thumbs up, you're doing an incredible job because you're staying the course. We don't really know what the most optimal level of protein is for keto. We do know that somewhere in the 20 to 25% range seems to be pretty good for getting your ketone levels elevated to a good degree. But we don't really know what the most optimal range for protein is. And really, I think that number, it varies on an individual basis. I think that if you're somebody who's extremely active, then more protein could be a little bit more beneficial. I spoke earlier about like the insulin sensitivity thing. That can play a role in how much protein you should have. So really the key here is self-experimentation, but self-experimentation at the right time. So, if you say you go out tonight and you have a huge steak meal and you test your glucose and ketones after, and their glucose is up, ketones are down, and you're all concerned. But the next morning you wake up, you test your ketones and glucose levels, and they're right where they should be. Then chances are this postprandial or following a meal, this result of that is probably what's changing your ketone levels and your glucose levels. So there's no need to freak out. So the take home here really is that if the worst thing that you're doing on keto is having too much protein, then I think you're doing a great job. And, I always speak about how the ketogenic diet is best when adopted as a lifestyle. And I think that living this ketogenic lifestyle where you don't have to necessarily track and you can just eat these approved foods, like, you can just eat meat because it's approved, and you can eat, certain vegetables because they're approved. That to me is going to be a lot better than freaking out about, am I having too much protein from this meat, or, is there enough fat in this meat? Is it too lean? I don't really think that that's something that's sustainable long term. I think that if you're somebody that you're staying the course and you're eating these keto friendly foods and staying in a caloric deficit, then chances are you're doing really well. So that's just kind of a quick little rant that I wanted to go on this morning. I'm not a firm believer yet until I see something more in the research about how protein levels can be more harmful when you're on keto. I just don't quite see it. I think that the bigger issue here is calories, making sure that you're not going into a huge calorie surplus all the time. I think it's okay to do it sometimes. I even think that having protein refeeds can be beneficial, and I'll put out another video on that sometime soon. But the main thing here, guys, is that I wouldn't be concerned with protein intake unless, if you're doing this for therapeutic reasons, maybe there's something there where, having too much protein in that acute window after your meal, that's going to affect ketone levels, and that could have some harm on your condition if, say, you're suffering from something like epilepsy or something like that. But if you're somebody that's doing this for, general pop, chances are it's not something that you need to be super concerned about. So again, self-experimentation at the right time is key, guys.